Welcome to East Coast DNA, another of our Music Week bonus episodes. Joining us today is Maureen Batt and Grej.
Yeah.
So you're joining us from your Toronto studio, and Maureen, you're here in Halifax. We have a little bit of doing a little cross-country action here, which is nice. So you guys were nominated this year for Classical Album of the Year, which you won at the ACMAs for Lighthouse, and you're nominated now for Music Nova Scotia Awards. So congratulations on both the nomination and the previous win.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I admittedly do not listen to a lot of classical music. I've had some passing experience in my lifetime. I did come up through music program, like in the education system here too and stuff. So I mean, a lot of exposure to that stuff when I was younger. And Andrew and I actually do have a first cousin that is an opera singer.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, Marcel d'Entremont. I don't know if you're...
I do know Marcel. Yes.
There you go. So, yeah, I have an appreciation for it, but I don't have a lot of exposure to it necessarily. So, Maureen, I was more familiar with you because we're in some of the same music groups online. I believe through Daryl's Blue Acres group there.
Yeah, Daryl Cameron.
Yeah. So I was familiar with you from that. And with the podcast, I try to keep up to date with what's going on the East Coast. I was aware of Lady of the Lake, even though I wasn't doing the podcast back then. Probably just from following the award shows and stuff too, because I think you were nominated back then too.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a few years ago now, 2018, I think.
Okay. And so, Grej, for yourself, you have a classical background yourself, but you're, especially in this case, it's more about electronic music.
Yeah.
I did a quick little dive into your background.
Mm-hmm.
A couple notable things for me as a music fan. I did see that one artist you worked with, you did one of the NPR Tiny Desk concerts.
That's right.
And something that I did, just if you want to give a quick little blurb on what I'm talking about. One thing I saw that was cool, I have not actually gotten to any of the performances in the past, but the Video Games Live. I don't know. What was your involvement in that? And just for anyone listening, maybe a quick little sentence or two about what Video Games Live is.
So Video Games Live is a symphony orchestra performing video game music. And at the time, I was an usher at Massey Hall and saw that they were performing, and I knew somebody that was playing percussion in the group, and I was like, hey man, if I could play triangle or something in this, please. I want to be a part of it. And someone actually ended up dropping out, so I came in and I was actually given the percussion one, all the busiest parts, with one, I think just a dress rehearsal. And it was really cool. It was very nostalgic. Obviously grew up playing video games, and it was a perfect combination of those worlds coming together. And it was pretty wild. It was really neat seeing everyone hold up their Nintendo DS's instead of lighters in the crowd, and it was wow, this is kind of trippy.
I'm sure that the videos don't really do it justice that you can see online, because being in it's like an immersive experience to be there, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think it was the only time I ever played in an orchestra with a click track. Everyone had click. It was such a weird experience, but also pretty cool.
So how is it that so you're in Toronto right now, and we're on an East Coast music podcast covering somebody for a Music Nova Scotia Award. So how is it that you two, obviously there would be some ties in the classical nature of both backgrounds, but how did you guys end up working together on Lighthouse in the first place?
Well, it's because of the subject matter. We were brought together, my brother-in-law, Tom Belding, was asking me about what I might do for another album. Tom's been very involved in both of our, I would say all of our projects, from graphic design and video projects, photos, perspective for me and Greg. And so Tom was just asking out of interest what I might do after Lady of the Lake. Lady of the Lake was my debut album. Came out in 2017. And so this conversation was a number of years ago now. And as we got talking, this project came to formation, and it was clear right away that it would be really cool to work on this project with Greg. Greg and Tom have known each other. When did you start going to school together?
Yeah, like high school. Yeah.
So Greg and I definitely knew each other in a parallel way. We're both from Fredericton. We're just that many years apart that we didn't have school exactly at the same time or band at the same time, which I guess is probably where we would have met, band or production. But so we were very aware of each other's body of work, but it's our connection to Tom that led us to be really excited about working on this project together.
And you mentioned Tom, so one of my questions related to that and to this album is that it's dedicated to Ashley, and they have the same last name. I don't have any idea what the relationship is. And the theme of the album being about loss and death and being a love story. I'm making a lot of assumptions here, but maybe I'll just let you guys tell the story of the whole fact that this is a concept album, and how these people tied into your life and the concept of the album and how that all came to be.
Yeah, go ahead, Maureen.
I was going to say we can start with the basics. Ashley is Tom's late wife. So Tom, as I said, is my brother-in-law. So we don't have a different word in English. My sister-in-law by marriage and dear friend of Greg's. And Ashley passed away from cancer. She was very young, and she kept journals, and Tom, when she passed, was writing letters to her. And it was those letters that formed the lyrics and the concept and the story and their whole story is the inspiration for this album.
And I don't get to do this for all the artists. But in your case, where I said, admittedly, I'm coming from a different background to even have the context to appreciate what I'm digesting, and seeing that it was a whole concept, I actually took the time to immerse myself in it and just listen to the album from start to finish. I had your digital booklet out so I could follow along with the lyrics that were there, and knowing the little bit of backstory and seeing who was writing the lyrics, I could pull out some of that story. It's very touching, knowing all that and going through it. It does bring out a lot of emotions if anyone does take the time to do that. One thing I was wondering, that the letter to death, is that from those journals then? Because that was written by Ashley herself.
That was extrapolated from one of her writings. Yeah.
Well, it's really a beautiful album. I'm glad that I took the time to sit down and do it. So anyone that's listening to this, if you're not familiar, please take the time to do it for yourself. It's not even that. How long is it all together? Like a half hour or longer?
I think it's around like 35, 36
Yeah.
minutes.
So I mean, it's worth taking the time. It's better than watching a rerun of an old sitcom from NBC or something.
That's right. No commercials, at least.
Mm-hmm. Why didn't we put that in our copy, Greg? Better than watching an old sitcom rerun.
Yeah. Now, Andrew's going to crucify me for that because he has another podcast called The Second Button that reviews Seinfeld episodes.
Listen, we love Seinfeld.
Yeah, everyone does.
We're not in competition with Seinfeld.
Yeah. See, we should have brought the little Tweety Bird Pez dispenser there. That would have been appropriate.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you guys are doing a showcase as well at Music Week, and it's an afternoon time frame?
Yes, it's on Saturday afternoon.
Okay, and that's at the Highland Arts Theatre.
That's right.
All right. So anyone that happens to be listening to this and you're on site, you might be able to walk over and watch this right now. just looking through here with your catalog, you had a few other things that came out in 2021 as well. So where once again, I'm not 100% familiar with how the opera world works and a soprano makes a living. What are these other things that we have here, like Aunt Helen? Is that like a stage performance that was recorded?
So Aunt Helen it's a short opera, so it's a 1-act opera, but it's very short. It's just under 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it was also nominated in a couple of categories. And I showcased with that last year at Nova Scotia Music Week. It was written by PEI-born composer Monica Pierce.
Okay.
About Helen Creighton. Have you heard of Helen Creighton and her ghost stories and her folk songs? You've heard of Farewell to Nova Scotia?
Yeah,
the Nova Scotia
yes.
song. So Dr. Helen Creighton collected all of those songs, and so Monica wrote an opera about this woman, and that's what that recording is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's the equivalent to like the indie rock world of an EP.
Yes.
A mini opera recording. That's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm going to have to dive into some of these as well too. That's very interesting. So what do people have to expect as a follow-up then? Because you were nominated for this award, but you had won the other one back in the spring. So you must have had time since to start planning out what your follow-up's going to be to Lighthouse.
I'll say something that's almost an answer to that, which is that because we recorded this in April 2021 and it didn't come out until August, and all of that, of course, is in the middle of the current state of affairs, we actually only did our first live performance of this on October 1st in Fredericton at the Playhouse.
Oh, wow. Okay. So this is a treat for people coming to Music Week, is that not too many of your own fans have actually got to see this live yet.
Yeah. So we're really excited about taking this places live. So that's our next step with this music.
Well, that is exciting. And so will you be touring around the East Coast, or are you doing like full national? Because you obviously both have contacts everywhere based on your resumes that I see in front of me.
We're open.
Yeah. So that's exciting. One other follow-up question. Since we had talked about the differences with your classical backgrounds and the fact that you're incorporating more of a electronic sound to this, maybe you guys could talk a little bit about the blending of the genres and how that works, being that you both have the classical background. You know the regular rules for what people are expecting, but what can classical fans that haven't been exposed to this expect from this merger?
Yeah, when Maureen approached me about making Lighthouse, I couldn't really visualize what it was going to be, and I think that's typically kind of how I work with dance choreographers and film. It's like I like the mystery of like what the music will unveil through the process, and for me it's about gathering lots of information about the content of the work, and then it just kind of naturally unfolds from there. And you know, I knew this was the first time working with a soprano, let alone, you know, a classically trained vocalist. I knew there was a lot of opportunity to explore Maureen's voice in unconventional ways, having her mimic some electronic sounds. So in the song "Pieces of You," there's like a moment where I guess kids these days call it drop, where it really like builds up and goes like boom. Having Maureen kind of cater to what those synths would be doing, rising up, and just really kind of pushing the limits of like how much can the voice provide before relying on all this electronic equipment that I know can do that. But yeah, so it was really interesting just like going down that sort of journey with Maureen, and I think through that process we found kind of a unique balance that it does sort of fall in the classical category, mainly because of Maureen, and it does follow a few conventions in contemporary classical music, but I think it really is like a combination of a few genres.
One thing I did have as a question originally, before I sat down to do the full immersive experience of listening to it all the way through, you both were credited for field recordings. And I'm like, I've never seen field recordings listed on an album before. I do listen to some scores, like, and I mean, as a alternative rock fan, like I like Trent Reznor does a lot of scores. I mean, that doesn't sound like a cool thing to be saying to people that are actually working in the industry on this stuff. But yeah, I'm familiar with some stuff like that. But the field recordings are the soundscapes in the background that are like the ocean and the birds chirping and stuff that you captured. That was a cool element that I'm not used to hearing in a traditional album either. Perhaps maybe with an opera or something. I don't know if you would do anything like that, but is that coming from the classical world, or is that experimentation because the electronic stuff does lend itself to things like score?
I think it's not so much for me. It's not necessarily parsed by genre, but it's more of a connection from the organic and the electronic worlds. So like I'm always looking for ways to create something that feels alive, and sometimes that can be hard to do when you're working with electronics.
Sure.
From a purely synthesis place. So, and I think it's just really inspiring, like hearing, I mean, we have field recordings going on right now. You had to shut your window.
Yeah.
There's sounds everywhere, and we can use those, it's not necessarily noise. So I think in the track that you'll be playing, Hope on Ice, there was a recording. I went down to Lake Ontario, and there was all these little icicles that kind of built up. This was in like early March, kind of built up along the shoreline. I was just recording those, and then mapped it out to my keyboard, and was able to play the icicles as an instrument.
That's cool.
So there's kind of like, for me, that's a way of like connecting the world to the music that we're creating.
That's awesome. And as an East Coaster, having the ocean sounds in there obviously pulls me right into it. Like it completely shuts down everything else. I hear the music and I hear the ocean, and I completely forget about everything else. It's like I'm sitting right there watching the ocean myself.
Well, and it's just so powerful too. Like, why try to recreate an ocean sound when you have the ocean?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
there's tons of sounds that were from right here in Nova Scotia on the recording too, which is cool.
Yeah. And what was it was recorded in Parisboro, and I know the videos that I watched were credited as Parisboro at the beginning as well. So is there a connection with the subject matter or yourselves, or it just happened to be where you're recording and there is an ocean there?
That's the answer to that is a little bit of everything you just suggested.
Okay.
We were looking for a place to be that would be safe, because it was March and April 2021 that we were talking about. So where could we be? We didn't know which province we were going to record in. We had all kinds of different plans after we got our funding where we could go. And it just so happens that Tom's aunt runs the Gillespie House Inn. And as part of that, they have like a meeting space, yoga studio, and Greg became convinced that he would be able to turn that into our studio. So that's what we rented for our recording project. So it was a special connection family-wise to be able to record there. Nature-wise, it was also safe, given other possibilities. So there were a lot of things that came together for that.
I think it was also, yeah, like Maureen's saying, it's like really creating a vibe for this project. Like, I don't think we would have gotten the same outcome if we were going into like a professional studio where we're clocking in and like working by the hour. It's like we wanted to create a space where we just didn't feel pressured by time, and just like we can step in and step out at any time, night, morning, day, whenever, right? And that really made a big difference.
It really did. And that might be one of the things that's like the most different from my process of it. Any other recording that you see that I've been on, it's not all of them, but most of them are with piano. Then I've gone into usually a church because those acoustics are favorable for Western classical singing. And I am recording in a certain amount of hours on this day and a certain amount of hours on this day. And the piano is tuned right before. And with this amount, it's very prescribed because I don't happen to own a big hall with a grand piano. So it has to be very prescribed. And those rentals are, very specific. And, working with the amazing people at Leaf Music, which is what most of my stuff is with and on. And this was just like, I didn't know what this project was going to be either. I had no concept of how to prepare vocally, what we were going to be doing. I didn't need to know what it was going to be. I knew that I was going to be able to just show up and trust that Greg had some kind of idea and process for us to start with. And I knew that we would just have that flow back and forth. And we did, which is wonderful. I mean, it is the first time we've worked together, but somehow we knew that it was going to work, which is awesome. But that was really important to me. I'm like, I know that you see this in like documentaries, like people go into studios just for the week. They have the week and they can just do whatever they need to for like a week or a month if they're rich, And I really, really wanted that because I've never had it. And it was everything. It was everything to have that week.
I did, and anybody that's listening to this can do the same thing if they go to your YouTube channel. There's some videos there, and I think they're linked right on your main website as well. There's the making of, and you can kind of see. I saw the little chakras poster down the background, and I could see I could see you guys moving back and forth. And it's somebody that has all the gear. It's a much smaller scale, but having a bunch of gear right in his living room for recording and everything, I was like, yeah, I can picture exactly what they were doing. They were shuttered away working on a concept album together. Totally. You could feel it just watching that quick little behind the scenes video too. So given that you have the previous experience and now this experience going forward for yourself, Maureen, especially where it's a different experience for you, would you prefer to do it this way in the future, or is it just a new tool that you can play with so that you have options going forward?
I think it really depends on the project. And I mean, obviously having more time feels really lovely, but also sometimes having a deadline is good too. And especially if you have a whole team of people. This was me and Greg. Greg was wearing 75,000 hats. He was composing, he was an artist, he was our engineer, he was producing, we were able to just be the two of us. So once we had our space rented, that made sense financially. Whereas if I were doing another recording, even like on Helen, Lady of the Lake, Breathing in the Shadows, any of these other ones, I mean, that would just cost so much to say, I just want 7 days to do whatever I want. And it's hard because you might not even need that. Having that space might feel really cool, that time, but it might not be necessary. So I think it's going to be project specific. I do always want more time than I have, but I think there's a balance between having a set container for certain projects and budget and that being not necessarily a bad thing, and then there is maybe somewhere a balance between all of that and having a little bit more time and space. So I'll be curious about that as I go forward.
And for yourself, Gretch, then moving forward, are you going to be exploring, like you said, it was your first time working with a soprano as well? You do have classical background, but are you exploring different styles of music going forward, or is there?
Yeah, I mean, I just love a challenge, and I get inspired by things that I am unfamiliar with. So I think that's what really drives me as a collaborator, is that I like to just explore and kind of really dive into the unknown and see what comes of it. So yeah, I can see it going in that direction.
I really enjoyed kind of diving into it because it was a little different for me. So I'm excited to be able to follow two new people and see where you guys are going with your careers as well. But also because I admit that on this podcast, we've been trying to not be genre specific, but we haven't covered all the genres. We've only had country really recently. And so this is the first time that we touched on classical. So for anyone that, especially in this Music Week series, anyone that's at Nova Scotia Music Week that may be interested in coming over to see you guys on the Saturday afternoon, is there anyone else that's in that classical world? I mean, obviously they tend to group people together, so coming a little early or staying a little late, you're going to get a little bit of flavor of somebody else doing something similar. But anyone in particular you would recommend that people check out?
I'm going to have to recommend my dear friend Jennifer King, who's a beautiful pianist, and she will be showcasing there as well. The whole classical showcase will be amazing, and we'll all be back to back, so it'll be pretty easy to come over and hear a few of us or all of us at the same time.
Yes, and I believe that's the same venue where the Artist Lounge is set up as well. We were originally going to be set up over there, but we're going to get the Holiday Inn. So if I'm over there, I will definitely stop by because I'd be interested to see you performing this live. But otherwise, if you guys are around the Holiday Inn, swing by. I am going to be set up in a conference room most of the weekend, but
awesome.
I tend to float around and start walking up to random people all the time, so you'll probably see me at some point. Feel free to say hi.
Awesome.
All right, thanks for coming on the episode, and in the future, if there's anything you guys have coming out, reach out. We can either just share the news with our fans, or you can come back on for a little follow-up.
Sounds great.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for chatting.
Bye.
Bye.
hear